Well, how do you know you can trust what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote about Jesus, including, most importantly, their records of the resurrection? Well, what I want to do is give you a few pieces of evidence to consider, okay? And this is just a quick overview. But first, you should consider the time frame in which these four accounts were written. All the gospel accounts were written within 40 years of Jesus' life. Paul's letters in the New Testament, they were written in that time frame as well. Now, why is that significant? Well, because if the writers were making up the story of the resurrection, it would have been simple to disprove and debunk the myth. First, the body of Jesus could have been used as proof. Second, and more convincing, there were still hundreds of people alive when these accounts were written who had personally interacted with Jesus. They've been present for all the events that these guys are recording. So if things hadn't occurred as they were written, well, these people would have easily dispelled the myths. Instead, think about this. The people who were reading the Gospels when they were first written, well, they could personally talk to hundreds of people to validate the stories in the accounts and know they were true. I mean, nobody had to take it by faith. They just had to trust the evidence and the recollections that were shared by so many people who were there. Third, all of the writers demonstrated knowledge of a range of localities from well-known to lesser known to obscure. You see, each gospel contains unique information, which means they didn't all copy from one another either. They were writing from different personalities to different audiences who each had different knowledge about the events. So these authors were writing based on their memory of what happened, but they all display familiarity and record with accuracy the geography, the culture, the specific people, the religious and political leaders of the time. There's a lot of evidence along this line of thinking, but I think you get the picture, right? Now, this leads to another common question. How do we know that the version of the accounts that we have are what these writers actually wrote? In other words, how do we know somebody didn't come along somewhere throughout history and change the Gospels at some point? That's a great question. Now, you may not be aware of this, but the Gospels are actually the best documented texts from ancient history, and that's by a wide margin. These early followers of Jesus, they copied these texts rapidly because it was the only way to get the information to people in different parts of the world. And these copies have been proven to have spread around the Mediterranean rim and even beyond that in large numbers because we've found a lot of these copies. Now let me ask you a question. If somebody wanted to change the stories in the four Gospels, how could they have done that as fast as the copies spread? Just think about it. Logistically, you couldn't have traveled that far in that world, gathered up all the copies that were already spreading, and made the changes in all of them so they were consistent. Remember, these copies weren't traveling as the Bible we know today. They weren't bound together. These were each individual document separately traveling to different places, not a collection of documents bound in a book. So Matthew's gospel, for instance, was its own document that was copied and shared and passed around. Same for Luke, same for Mark, same for John, same for each of Paul's letters. It would be 400 years after Jesus before all of these documents are gathered and bound together in what we know as the Bible. So chasing them all down to change them, that would have been impossible. And we found enough of these copies in various places that we've been able to compare, and all have shown to be consistent with one another. In other words, you can trust what you read as what the author wrote. Which leaves us with one question that I'm going to answer in our final session. Well, what if these authors made it all up? Let's talk about that in session 3.